Aloha, my kakou, everyone. Welcome to the Moana Nui podcast. We are supporting Olelo Hawaii month. I cannot believe it's already February, but we are celebrating Olelo Hawaii month in addition to Black History Month. And so, welcome to our show tonight. Our topic tonight is going to be understanding Pidgin. And for those who don't know, I know many people know, Pidgin is a dialect that is widely used in the Hawaiian Islands, but not just in the Hawaiian Islands. It's also used in different cultures around the world. And so we wanted to explore this topic as Pidgin as a mode and a form of communication for bridging gaps between communities and the use of the dialect. For me, if those who have watched our show before, by now you probably know that I am also an author and a writer. And what I have seen in some of the projects that I'm working on are that writers are being discouraged from using Pidgin or different dialects, which in my mind waters down like the authenticity of storytelling, of dialogue, of communication, and the narratives that we're trying to portray in our work. And in some ways, it is also a partial erasure of our identity because I know for myself, growing up in Hawaii, Pidgin is a big part of just life. And so even in my career, as I've moved away from the islands, you sometimes go into these spaces and you got to change the way you talk because there's this misperception that if you speak Pidgin, you're stupid or you don't know how to communicate and you don't know what you're talking about. So Pidgin is something that I think is really important. And as someone who lives away, that's something that I kind of like a chameleon go in and out of depending on the audiences that I'm talking to. But I really think it's important, particularly for our keiki and our young students, that they feel like they can express themselves and that doing it in a way that incorporates Pidgin is okay. And they shouldn't be ashamed or restricted from speaking about it or writing about it in that way. So I want to introduce our panel moderator tonight. I'm really happy to have her back. Her name is Michelle Kamigaki-Baron, and she is a PhD student who is focusing her research and studies in this particular area. We had her on our show, I think it was, late last year. And I really enjoyed the conversation that we had that was talking let's talk about paradise and in Hawaii in that framework. So we really wanted to bring her back to the show and let her continue her work and also open up this conversation more broadly for our community. So welcome, Michelle, back to our show. Aloha.
Mahalo, Moana. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for Moana said I'm a researcher along with a PhD student, and I'm from Honolulu. My mother is from Moana Nui on Hawai'i Islands, and a brief introduction of kind of like what I'm doing with the Pidgin stuff is I'm really trying to understand the relationship between Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii. So currently, Pidgin is spoken by over half the population in Hawaii, while Olelo Hawaii is spoken by approximately 2,000 as a first language. So one of my goals in this research is to understand how we can increase the number of speakers of Olelo Hawaii by understanding how Pidgin speakers can connect their knowledge between Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii to learn better. Yeah, I guess secondarily, what you said about Pidgin advocacy is really something that is like a second goal of my work, is just trying to understand how we can make schools just better environment for Pidgin speakers now, because it's a huge injustice that it's discouraged if not punished in schools now. So yeah, that's kind of a big goal of my work. So enough about me. Can I introduce the panel now?
Yes, yeah. I'm gonna hand it over to you now.
Nice. Mahalo. Okay, mahalo. I'm very privileged to be introducing the brilliant panel that we have today. So first, I wanted to introduce Mark Vincent Villegas. Mark is a carpenter, tattoo studio owner, and father of 2 girls. Having immigrated from the Philippines to Hawaii at age 11, Mark grew up with both Pidgin speakers and second language learners of English and experienced the utility of Pidgin for immigrants to Hawaii firsthand. Next, we have Maika Mizukami. Born and raised in the island of Kauai, Maika Mizukami is Gosei Yonsei Japanese and Shimanchu Okinawan in Hawaii. Raised in between Eleele and Lihue, Maika grew up with teachers who told him that he needed to speak quote-unquote proper English to go to a good college and get a good job. Currently, I'm going to say this myself, he goes to a good college and has a good job. He didn't write that part. Okay, so Maika works as the associate director at the Center for Oral History at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and he's also a PhD student in the Department of Second Language Studies there. And last but not least, we have Ali Rosette. Ali is from Kailua, Oahu. She's the mother of four, a PhD student in curriculum and instruction, and a kumu of Olelo, Hawaii at Manoa. So welcome, everyone. Mahalo nui for coming. And just to set the stage again, today, I just hope we can have a discussion on the various ways Pidgin holds value in modern-day Hawaii. And our panel, as you can see, although we all come from Hawaii, we each come from different perspective and mana'o. So I just wanted to acknowledge that these are just our experiences, and we get so many different ones around Hawaii, right? So not to say that one experience or opinion is right or wrong, but these are just our experiences and our opinions. So for those who are listening, feel free to follow along the topics we discuss and some of the questions, and feel free to leave a comment or send us a message. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So my first question for the panel, and this is for all of you, I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself and describe your story with Pidgin. Could we start with Maika, then Ali, then Mark?
Sure. Hi, thanks so much for having me on and assembling this awesome panel. Before I start, I wanted to say that Pidgin, another name for Pidgin is Hawaii Creole English, and it's considered a language, a Creole language, but we just call it Pidgin. And that's like the endearing name we have for it. But yeah, like you said in my intro, that's kind of my relationship to Pidgin. My dad is from Kekaha on the island of Kauai, so he has kind of like a really deep Pidgin, I like to describe it as. But I grew up with lots of teachers that said, don't speak Pidgin. If I was counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, they would be like 3, not tree. So it got hammered out of me pretty early on. But now that I'm a lot older and I've had time to think about it and reflect on it, I really see the value in Pidgin today. So thank you for having us here for this conversation.
Mahalo, Maika. That's really nice to hear. Who was the one that I said next? Was it Mark? Ali.
Aloha. Aloha nui. Mahalo. It's good to be here with all of you. And yep, I'm from Kailua, Oahu. I was raised by my grandparents. We lived in their house and growing up, and my grandparents are both Okinawan. My grandmother was raised in the Kunia plantation, so she spoke a very true plantation Pidgin. So did my grandpa, although he was raised in Kalihi. So that's where I learned how to speak Pidgin. But when I turned 13, my ohana moved to California, and I went to high school, 1 year of middle school and high school before I came back. So right before we moved to the mainland, my dad said, "You are not gonna speak Pidgin anymore." And then me and my brothers are all like, "How come?" He's like, "Because of that. You cannot say that." So yeah, I appreciate Pidgin, and in my work as a Hawaiian language instructor, I use it as well. So I have, way of Olelo. Sorry, mahalo.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself too?
So I grew up in Kalihi, right? 32 years old. I came here like roughly around 10 years old. I learned English as a second language, and at the same time, I picked up Pidgin from my surroundings here in Hawaii. At school, I had friends with different backgrounds: Japanese, Filipino, Koreans, you name it. Everybody, etc. They all use Pidgin, so I naturally learned it too. To me, Pidgin today is a natural part of the way I communicate. Is not something I consciously think about. I switch it on and off in my daily life. When I work in construction, I use it a lot. Everybody's Pidgin in construction, depending on the role. If you're in like an engineer, basically a lot of it you use proper English. In my tattoo business, it's a mix. It's more of a 50-50. I have people all over the world, like other states and stuff. So I use proper English there, but I'm very comfortable with the Pidgin side of it because it's more emotions involved. It's more fun to use it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mark. Actually, so I wanted to direct the first question to you. So Mark is like a friend of mine, actually. And one time he told me, it was a long time ago, but one time he told me this story about how he was seeing a lot of new immigrants to Hawaii from the Philippines, for example, find Pidgin easier to learn and adapt to compared to English. And this really started to make me curious because, as everybody knows, Pidgin historically came to be because of this kind of mixture, right? It was a plantation kind of space, a lot of people from different places, such as the Philippines, coming together and basically making a new language. There was a mixture of all of these languages, right? And this actually enabled the plantation laborers to come together despite their differences, right? And rise up against the plantation owners and demand for better and more humane working conditions. So when we talk about the historical function of the language, it's interesting to think about how Pidgin possibly is continuing to serve this purpose for newer immigrants. So Mark, as a newer immigrant to Hawaii, and as somebody who has a lot of people in your circles who are also newer immigrants to Hawaii, I wanted to hear more about what you think about this. Do you think that Pidgin is valuable to new immigrants to Hawaii who don't speak English as a first language? And I'm wondering if you could just share some of your experiences or what you've observed from those around you.
Absolutely valuable. Yeah, it's so easy for me to speak it because you have so much room to just make mistake. I learned broken improper English, but it occurred so much in my natural environment that it became part of my identity anyway. Learning English was challenging for me, so Pidgin was less intimidating, and it feels like it has more room and acceptance to make mistakes in my grammars in general. Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. Wondering if maybe other people maybe wanted to chime in with any experience that you've noticed. No need if you don't have something to chime in, but I just wanted to give the opportunity. Oh, I just wanted to hear if other people had thoughts about that. But yeah, that's a really good, I liked how you said that because I think, yeah, it's interesting that it still has this purpose of, as you said, like just talking with other people from different communities too. So that's really interesting. Okay, so here's a question for Ali. Ali is kumu Olelo Hawai'i and has publicly described her experiences using Pidgin as a medium of instruction to make the learning of Olelo Hawai'i more accessible to students. So I'm wondering if you could speak more about your experiences as a teacher who doesn't punish the use of Pidgin in the classroom, but instead encourages it.
Yes, yes, I teach Olelo Hawaii at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I think it's important that students have a place in their formal higher learning experience where Pidgin is okay and encouraged because it is hard to, I think that it's definitely frowned upon in academia. And so in the classroom, students got to put on this, it's almost like they have to pretend like they don't speak Pidgin, I think, I'm assuming in many other classes. But in Olelo Hawaii, I use it for two main purposes. The first one is I use it because I want to build connection and I want the students to feel safe. They're in a safe space. They're feel comfortable and be able to joke around and feel like an ohana. And I think one way to achieve that is by like talking Pidgin, learning Pidgin, because there's always a good mix of students that were raised in Hawaii and students that are from elsewhere. So it's like this learning point for everybody to teach or learn Pidgin. And I also use it because in teaching Hawaiian, there's a lot of similarities from the structure of sentences in Hawaiian, but also there's certain things in Hawaiian that I find I cannot actually explain through using English. I actually have to use Pidgin, like some Pidgin expressions or even just the intonation of how things are said. It's hard to do that in English. So I'm grateful that I can lean on Pidgin a little bit. And then when I do that, students, I think they can actually pick it up a lot better. So for example, like there is some stuff in Hawaiian where the best way for me to explain it is by saying this means laris and that means larat. And it doesn't mean like this, or I mean it does, but I tell them that and then I think they remember, oh laris, larat. Okay, we get it. So
I like
Yeah.
I like how you're describing there's like more than one kind of reason why it could be valuable in the classroom if I'm understanding you correctly. Like you're explaining that there's this teaching kind of value where, you know, because of the relationship being similar languages, right, in a lot of ways, then it's easier to teach, but also that it helps motivate students, right? You'll bring them in, you said, I think you said make the space to feel comfortable. And I think that's really, those are multiple values, right? Like sometimes we don't think about how important it is for students to feel comfortable, right? And I think that was really interesting about what you were saying. Because we're a little bit early on time. I wanted to take the time to, while we're talking about Pidgin in the classroom, maybe Mark or Maika or Ali just talk about maybe your experiences rewind when we were back in school and maybe some of our experiences with Pidgin in the classroom. Like if you had some kind of negative or positive experiences with Pidgin and what was the messaging in schools for you guys? If you could start, do you want to start with Maika? Okay.
Yeah. Like I gave that example about the counting with like 3 and 3.
Yeah.
That's one I remember probably from elementary school. But that's also like linguistically like a developmental thing as well, right? The TH sound is really hard to
Yeah.
say. But it was framed as being this Pidgin kind of fault. And then so I think I was like ashamed to speak Pidgin for a long time. And then in high school, I got to do this, or I always wanted to get as far away from Hawaii as possible. Growing up on Kauai, really small island, I wanted to see the world. And I thought I wanted to go to the East Coast for college. And then I got to spend some time with the Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps one summer. And then that like really changed my thinking about Kauai and Hawaii and being from such a special place. And then it was after that summer when I really started to try and use Pidgin, and I tried to use it with my friends, but it came out of nowhere because I never really did that before. So I remember just my friends like really laughing at me for starting to use Pidgin again. But it wasn't like making fun of me laughing. It was more like, oh, where is this local side coming from? And starting to like explore my relationship with Pidgin more from there. So yeah, I think I felt the shame in school, but then through other educational opportunities like the Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps, I got to change my perspective on that. Yeah.
There's a lot that you said that resonates with me. Yeah, Mark, did you want to share your experiences?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Pidgin feels more forgiving.
Yeah.
Making grammar mistakes, speaking with accents, or make lingo my native language. I have an auntie that works in home care. Get away with her accent and all that stuff just because of Pidgin. Like my own mother came here in 2016, and she's really shy to speak English. And using Pidgin has actually helped her learn English because she was less shy to speak Pidgin and easier to interact and practice English that way. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy Pidgin a lot. Like when I do use it, like, especially with locals in general, it's more emotions involved. It's more fun that way. You'll know when you learn the culture.
Yeah.
It needs to stay.
That's good to hear. You're also talking about like your current job and there's different spaces. Do you feel like they're both kind of spaces where it's pretty free to speak Pidgin, or is it like ever bad to not be able to speak Pidgin in like the places that you work?
I'm not shy about Pidgin.
Yeah.
Pidgin is awesome. I can spot it when a local person is in front of me. Yeah, the energy is different. The vibe is different. I just Hawaiian culture in general is awesome. I just met this local brother, private. Well, he's a big business owner, and I get so happy when I see one very successful business owner, and he's like straight from Manalo, and he's so local. You can't about it. Like he's wearing slippers, and it's like super Hawaiian. He can just walk straight to like Foodland and all that. He doesn't have to worry. But super smart, impressive. But it doesn't even matter. He doesn't proper anyway. He would speak Pidgin. Yeah, business with that. He goes very far with it. Yeah.
That's
So
yeah.
I don't think Pidgin's gonna hold us back.
It's really nice.
Other, yeah.
Oh, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, it's really nice to hear the different perspective because I really had no idea. Because I think this, like Ali was saying before, I feel like in certain fields it's really rejecting, and then there's other fields that are a little bit more accepting, and then yeah, it's just interesting to hear the diversity of like experiences. Ali, did you want to share more about like your experience as a student in schools, and if it maybe just like people experience experience with Pidgin?
Yeah, I think that, well, I grew up in Kailua. I went to Enchanted Lake Elementary and Kailua Inter. I feel like back then there was choke local kids, so many kids talk Pidgin, although I don't know anymore. It might not be like that. So yeah, I spoke a lot of Pidgin with my friends. I still think that from what I can recall, like it wasn't encouraged though in the classroom, and that, you know, if you did it too much, it was like you weren't smart enough. I do remember feeling like that. And then, but at my home, it was like that was how I actually really spoke a lot of Pidgin with my grandma, because I was my grandma and my grandpa, they were always at home, so that's who I talked with. And I didn't talk Pidgin too much to my parents though. So my dad is from Mexico and he was in the military, and my mom, she was raised Kaneohe, so she did speak Pidgin as well. But I think they encourage us to speak more proper English. And then I think it also helps though to have friends that are real, you know. I have one friend in particular. She was super tera, and we only speak Pidgin to each other. And I think that it's a good mode of communication because you feel like how Mark is saying, you can let loose, is forgiving, and it's also always evolving too. I feel like humor just goes hand in hand. Like jokes sound better in Pidgin, so I don't know what it's like now in school, but I know what it feels like at the university. It's like,
Yeah.
maybe not.
I'm like Mona said before, I'm living in Canada right now, and I'm just doing my schooling here, but plan to go back home to Hawaii. And one time, it's interesting because I'm constantly giving talks about my research and why it's important. And one of the kind of driving home points that I try to make is, look, guys, like this is something that actually happens all over the world. Like sometimes there's one language that everybody is like, oh, this one's the proper one to speak, and then there's this other language, and they said, oh, this is not proper. And it's really just who's speaking it that kind of sets that divide. And it really just keeps people like controlled, to be honest. And because even today with Pidgin, like it's not just hard to access education, but you can be prevented from receiving employment, and that's legal. And it remains current and unchallenged to this day. You can just by having a Pidgin accent in your English, you can legally get fired or prevented from receiving employment. And so I think this is really interesting just to think about how pervasive it really is. It's something that is people actually like it that was brought to court and they lost, trying to just protect the ability to have a Pidgin accent in the place that Pidgin is spoken, right? And I just think about how much of a shame that is. But even talking about this stuff in Canada, it's interesting how fast people have a negative perception about it. Sometimes I remember I was giving this presentation and somebody asked the question, they said, oh, but isn't it important to speak English? You should speak English and punish the one that will bring negative consequences. And I guess my response to that might be, I think one is that there's different types of value in different languages, right? Some people say this about Olelo Hawaii all the time. Oh, it's not a language that's going to make you big bucks anymore. And there's different values in different languages. And I think it's interesting to think about how monolingualism is like somehow this norm that we have now, but we're all over the world. Speaking more than one language is pretty standard, right? So maybe there's this opportunity that we could make space for Pidgin. And maybe it is the case that if we are going to be like going to the continent, or if we're going to go other places, then maybe it's important to also learn English or other languages, especially if you're in Hawaii, learn Olelo Hawaii. But I guess my response to that was just like, there's different value to different languages, and also just like the harm in punishing the use of just somebody's first language, right? I think is really detrimental to kamaaina and just the next generation, every generation, right? Whenever we see this. And this is something that really occurs around the world. So yeah, I really resonated with what everybody brought to the table. I'm wondering, I guess if along that note, Maika, I wanted to direct a question to Maika. So Maika, in his work as a researcher, has studied the value of the use of languages such as Pidgin and Uchinaguchi, the Okinawan language, to communicate their identity to others, to build trust and rapport, among other things. So I'm wondering if you could speak more about this research, as well as your personal experience on what happens when languages are policed or discouraged from being spoken. Are there certain consequences or impacts of such policing that you think are not talked about enough?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think flows well with what we were just talking about. So thinking about like rapport and Pidgin in the classroom, my research has been more with like the Japanese language classroom here in Hawaii. And Pidgin wasn't the focus of my study, but some of the teachers I interviewed were from the US, some local, some not local. And one that was really interesting, he wasn't born or raised in Hawaii, but in the interview we were talking about, oh, how might your students perceive you if you're like not from here, you're not Japanese, what do you think your students think of you? And he was like, oh, they must think I'm like some haole kind sensei. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting kind of way to say it. And it just came out so naturally. So it really shows how in tune he is to the cultural and social environment of Hawaii, this place, his classroom. And then he was talking about how he hopes that makes the classroom a comfortable place where the students can just ask him any kind of questions. So it plays a role even in these other languages that are being taught in Hawaii, in the kind of these really small ways, but that really does help build that relationship with students and make them feel comfortable, like what Ali was talking about. And the other part too, thinking about policing or like the negative impacts of this is another project I was working on collectively with Dr. Christina Higgins, my advisor and director of the Sato Center for Creole and Pidgin Studies, and then another student in the second language department, Kristen Urata. She's a PhD candidate who also has done a lot of work around Pidgin. But both Kristen and I taught this course, Second Language Studies 130, Introduction to Pidgin in Hawaii, which looks at, I guess, the history of Pidgin from a language rights perspective, but not only Pidgin, but also like Olelo Hawaii and like language issues in Hawaii and the Pacific. And part of the classwork is for students to go out into the community and notice what signs are in what language. So really taking note of the linguistic landscape and documenting that, finding examples of Olelo Hawaii in public signage and examples of Pidgin. So we looked at all of the data that the students submitted, and it was interesting because the students had to then share their own ideas and thoughts about these signs and ask their friends about it too. And there was this really positive kind of image of Pidgin coming out from all of these responses. And this is like we call it citizen sociolinguistics approach, where it's not the top-down researcher imposing the framework. We're trying to see what like everyday people are thinking and what kind of information they're bringing to the table, and then trying to look at that. And from there, it was really apparent that they weren't treating Pidgin with this stigma that we've been talking about and have experienced. So I don't know, there might be this like disconnect between the official discourses with, I think like Mark was touching upon this, where it's, you can use Pidgin and be successful, but that's not what everyone hears. It's everyone hears you need to speak proper English to get a good job, to make money. But you look at what our students and their friends are saying, and it's a very different story. So there's a disconnect there.
Well, that's really interesting. Sorry, I just had a moment where I'm just, darn, that's crazy. I didn't even think about how that's really true. There's sometimes a disconnect between how I think it's just I don't want to shame my parents, but my parents just really experienced a lot of hardship because of speaking Pidgin. I think particularly my mom, there was just a lot of things because my family that's from Hono now, like they all had just experienced like the negative consequences of language stigma. So of course, to try to protect their kids, they'll say one time I was young and they just sat me in front of the TV. They're like, okay, learn how to talk good English like that guy. And I think back and I'm like, okay, it's hard because it's like it gets you. Sometimes it's the way that it is, and it's the way that they want it, just to try to protect you. But it's interesting to see how maybe there's a lot of advocacy work that have been going on in like different places. I think, and it's not necessarily coming. Like I know that there's a lot of work in the university, but it's coming from different places. Like what this advocacy and like language rights looks like is. It looks different, right, from different places. And it's really valuable to see how it's coming up like this and it's making kind of like a lot of this space is more comfortable for people living in Hawaii. So it's really nice to hear that part. We're flying through these questions so fast. I thought that we'd have too many questions. And yeah, I'm just wondering if we can expand this part a little bit more because it's been fostering such good conversation. So yeah, I don't know. Is there other kind of parts or like domains that you wanted to talk about, Maika, and just like your work in, I think in Pidgin, but also maybe in other languages in terms of policing and maybe just like kind of language rights work? And what does that look like in different domains?
Yeah, I guess before I touch on that, my work at the Center for Oral History, a lot of the kupuna and people, aunties, uncles out in the community we interview will speak Pidgin, and we then transcribe these interviews, give it back to them to review. And once or twice I've had someone be like, oh, I don't want my interview out there anymore because it's in Pidgin. And I'm like, no, there's so much good knowledge in there, and we want your mana'o, and like it was talking story, so it's I don't know, it's really difficult to explain how it can still be like these stories can still be valuable when these kupuna see their like how they're talking and they really don't like it because of you said your mom went through a lot of hardship with Pidgin, so that's kind of a different area of where this kind of negative stereotype of Pidgin has or does impact. But that aside, thinking about other contexts, the one I'm most familiar with is Uchinaguchi, or the Okinawan language, and all of the other Shimakutuba or island languages in those islands in the Ryukyus. And with Japanese colonization, there were assimilation policies where students would have, if they said anything in their local island language, they were given a dialect tag that they had to wear around their neck. And it was this big wooden block that said dialect on it. And the only way they could get rid of it was by outing one of their classmates who would speak the language. So sometimes they might step on their foot or something, and that way, you know how we naturally say ouch or something, and that's really hard to do in a second language, to naturally say those things. So stuff like that, they would say it in the local island language and then pass on the dialect tag. But if you look at Okinawa today, a lot of the older generation can still speak it, but the younger generation doesn't speak Uchinaguchi at all. And it's really interesting too, because Okinawa has such a huge global diaspora. So you look at the South American populations and Downs who emigrated over there in the 1900s, and their descendants can still speak some Uchinaguchi, which is really interesting because it's like in the homeland, in the motherland, like it's because of these assimilationist policies, it's not being spoken or used or encouraged, and there's just so many roadblocks to include it in education that there is this mindset and values too, right? You're talking about there are so many cultural values to language, but I think because everything is associated with capitalism and making it big
Mhm.
off of money,
Mm.
that's where the emphasis is, and that's why a lot of these kids are learning English instead of their ancestral language in Okinawa,
Mhm.
which is really sad.
I like how I like what you say, especially just bringing it back to just like to Okinawa as well. I think it's interesting. I think it's important to describe this as like a global phenomenon, and I think that kind of makes it more. It feels more real. When I talk to people about Pidgin in Hawaii, sometimes they'll laugh at me. Oh my God, are you getting a PhD in Pidgin? That's really ridiculous. But a lot of times there's a lot of, I talk to people and they have a lot of shame, even if they speak Pidgin themselves. And I think sometimes when you discuss it like this in this global way, right? It's not just happening with Pidgin. It's not just happening in Hawaii, in our multilingual community, but it's happening all over the world. And it's the same kind of effect that we see, right? So there's no sense of holding shame because, yeah, I think when you see that it's happening all over and like kind of the reasoning behind it's something you can see why things exist that way and like why you should have pride for the languages that you speak. I'm wondering, Mark, if you can explain. I think we were talking also about just like the context of the Philippines is similar in some ways, right? Where you're meant to speak Tagalog in schools, where even though you come from different Philippine languages coming at home, right? I'm wondering if you could explain that experience or kind of what it's like in the Philippines within that regard as well, with language policing and maybe having to speak a certain language in class.
Yeah, for me, any of these languages is just a form of communication, really. In the Philippines, there's 7,000 islands with 200 something plus dialect. And the way we communicate with each other is through Tagalog, which is like the main dialect. It's English to us. And also English is also taught in our school. It's if comparing it to Pidgin is very different. The culture is different. And I still know so much Filipino culture. I gotta say, Pidgin is a very different way of communication. There's just so much love in it, and and I don't know. I'm so nervous. I don't even know what to say. But yeah, I don't know what else there is. Easily underestimated, but
Mhm.
it shouldn't have to be that way. Really, people should just be open to it because English is just a communication, a
Yeah.
way of like like do business. If I'm gonna do a proposition to business, if I need to use proper English, I will use proper English.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking to my friend right next to me in Moke, it should be anything. Just it's just a language, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I was wondering if there was one, if in the classroom in the Philippines, right? I don't know if this was you who was saying it, but so even if you you're from a Visayan family, right? And then you said, is it similar where you're like dumped in Tagalog at school, even, and do they bridge the gap between the different languages that are spoken at home and at school, or do they help
No,
you along the way?
no, yeah. So Tagalog is like a proper dialect, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at home we speak our dialect, and then when we go to school, there's subjects like about Philippines, which is Tagalog side, and history. We gotta learn the history about just English in general, like America. Really, we're very influenced by America. The reason why we have to learn English is because of the future in general to keep us secure moving forward. Who knows? We end up working in abroad, and we can use that. Yeah, but but it was never an issue. It's just us trying to learn a different language or dialect in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying it's like a different vibe than in Hawaii for sure, yeah.
Very different. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, okay. Thanks for sharing, both of you. Yeah. I'm wondering, Ali, if you can explain. I don't know if you have much to say about this. I think that you probably do, but just with Olelo Hawaii speaking rights in Hawaii, I'm wondering if you could speak more about that. And I know that you do some work with just the way that the ancestors spoke and those things. I'm wondering if you can share a bit about policing, or just maybe how the value of Olelo Hawaii is sometimes not always emphasized in culture in society now. So I'm wondering if you had much thoughts about that.
First and foremost, I think my main prerogative as a Kumu Olelo Hawaii is to make sure that Olelo Hawaii lives, right? And that it's accessible and that people learn the language of their kupuna, or even if as a non-Hawaiian myself, like of just the place where you're growing up because you love this place and you love the people and the history that comes with it. So when I look at policing of Pidgin or things like that in the space that I work in at the university, I think it's a shame because I also see students coming from Ohana where they might be the first generation to go to college, or and that their Ohanas might already feel that college is not for them for many different reasons. But I think sometimes it comes down to that. It comes down to being told that like the language you speak gives the impression that you're uneducated, so like you don't belong in college. So I guess the reason why I'm very conscious of the generational trauma that comes with Pidgin, that I don't even think people really think hard, like that's the reason why they don't go to college, or why it's so hard to be in college if your ohana maybe isn't as supportive. So is that kind of the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I yeah. I think
I
that, and also just like the way that historically and Olelo Hawaii was also
oh right, yeah.
just had a lot of this. Yeah, I know that that context is different, right? But it started in a similar way where it was just discouraged from being spoken for similar reasons in Cromwell. So yeah, but you answered my question. If you wanted to add anything.
No, I do. I just wanted to say that, yeah, there's like a double, there's two things that people are battling with. Is one, being in this environment, learning Olelo Hawaii, and also two, having Pidgin as a native language can really be like twice the burden to access ancestral knowledge. So that's just my job. And I don't have the way I relate to it is not as a Hawaiian, but I watched my grandmother have a lot of like self criticism because of speaking Pidgin, where she would just flat out say, I'm dumb. And yet my grandmother is who held all of the traditions of Okinawa, like all of the dance and the music, and that's who I learned everything from. So to see somebody who I respected so much and who held all this ike for my ohana say that they felt simply just dumb, like really hurts. So and that maybe that's why I feel so motivated to make sure that everybody that walks into the classroom wanting to learn Olelo Hawaii, knowing that it was also a language that was banned and looked down upon and separated from the people, that as much as possible I can make those walls come down and help people to reconnect.
Mahalo. This is really rich conversation. Yeah, there's so many thoughts here. I'm sure that everybody can have related kind of experiences, but yeah, there's just so much richness in this conversation. I really appreciate everybody coming. We're heading towards the end of the last 10 minutes. So I'm wondering, in maybe the last question, I'm just wondering if each of you can describe maybe what is an ideal future with language in Hawaii, and does Pidgin fit into that future? Can we start with Mark?
Yeah, I hope and believe that Pidgin remains strong in Hawaii, both because I like using it and I like and it just feels different and more expressive to use that than English, in my opinion. There must be a reason why immigrants tend to learn Pidgin alongside English. I think immigrants can learn English by the help of Pidgin. Yeah.
Mahalo. Thanks. It's really, yeah, it's just so much thoughts. I can't stress it enough how my brain is exploding. I'm really happy to hear everybody's thoughts. Maika, could you maybe want to get at the question next?
Yeah, so like the future of language in Hawaii, what would be really cool in the future is if everyone who was like raised here, was multilingual, like spoke Olelo Hawaii, spoke English, spoke Pidgin, and whatever other languages they speak at home. And if there could be that kind of support for that kind of multilingualism on all levels. I know it's not easy, but that is coming from like the language rights perspective, right? Where you have the right to be educated and have access to healthcare and all of that, like in your own language, to build in those supports, especially like looking at Olelo Hawaii and how far it's come. It still has a long way to go, but there's so much potential in that future, which is really exciting. And I hope that Pidgin isn't forgotten along the way, because a lot of times it's more like in the background, right? It's not in the forefront in kind of these language politics of Hawaii today. So yeah, I would like to see a much more lively multilingual future where languages are more equal. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Maika. Ali, do you want to take a stab at that question?
Yes, I'll just, if I could just dream up anything, I would say Pidgin in our elementary schools, go. Let's start it. More than just, I felt like the only time I ever heard Pidgin in school was when Frank de Lima came to visit. Maybe more Frank de Lima visits, and yes, with Olelo Hawaii, and because I really think that when we send a message to our keiki, that is okay, that is a language, and that you look at that, you're trilingual, then that will also spread to the ohana, and then the parents will have less shame about it, that, oh, I don't have to tell my kid stop talking like that. And that maybe we will also educate our educators that come in from outside, like to not shame the keiki to Olelo. I really do think it starts with the messages we send our keiki.
Thank you so much. Mahalo, everyone, for tuning in. This is such a good conversation. Thank you to the panel. Each one of you has brought so much richness to this conversation. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really happy with just how this conversation's turned out. I hope we can carry on the conversation about the value of Pidgin with others around us. And please share us again, with those who are listening, share us your thoughts on experiences that you've had and just maybe your opinions on this. It's really something I think that maybe needs to be discussed more often and in Hawaii and in our circles. Before you go, again, I'm a researcher, so I just want to spread the word. If you or anyone who you know is above the age of 18 speaks Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii and wants to take part in some research, please visit tinyurl.com/talk-pidgin. We're giving $15 Amazon or Zippy's gift cards to anyone who participates in this research. I'm so desperate to find participants to move this research forward. So much thanks. Mahalo nui loa. If you want to reach me, you can email me at kamigaki.baron@gmail.com. That's KAMIGAKI.BARON@gmail.com. Maika, how can listeners find you?
They can find me at the UH Manoa Center for Oral History on our website. My contact information is there, or I don't know, on social media. On Instagram, I'm Mizu Maika, so Mizu from my last name, Micah.
Mahalo. What about you, Ali?
Mahalo to you, Michi, as well as Moana. I'm not on the socials, but you can find me at the University of Hawaii. I work in Kawai Huelani Center for Hawaiian Language. My email is aliciap@hawaii.edu.
Mahalo. Mark, how can we find you?
Maybe through my studio.
Yeah.
That would be tattoo.aos. AOS means Alpha Omega Studio. It's tattoo.aos.
Tattoo.aos is that's on Instagram.
Correct.
Yeah, go check out Mark's tattoo studio. It's nuts. Okay, all right, everybody. Shoots. See you next time. Ahui ho.
Shoots.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Hui ho.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then. When they annexed Hawaii and called it cedar lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves the Republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. Never cover all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if we put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. Never cover all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.